Hey, you're listening to Blindsight. Let's go. Mental health isn't something to take lightly. It's time to fight. It's time to thrive. Let's do this.
Welcome to Blindsight. This is your host, Bill Lundgren. I'm delighted to have you listening in on this conversation. I'm delighted to introduce Andrew Leland, who's an author, and he has written what I think is the must-read book, which is The Country of the Blind, A Journey into Blindness. And I have to say, Andrew, welcome to Blindsight.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
For full disclosure, I need to let people know I love the book, and was particularly identified because I also have RP, Retinitis Pigmentosa, and so much of what you said, and I even went through the center that you went through. I have attended NFB meetings, and, I really was so appreciative of your book.
I'm so grateful to you for saying that. Thank you.
What has been people's reaction to the book? Have you had any surprises?
I think writing the book, thinking first about blind readers' responses, I knew that folks like yourself who shared the RP diagnosis, would find a lot to recognize. And I think I felt a little wary of the divide that I recognized. And I write a bit about between folks who are folks who are congenitally blind versus adventitiously blind, which is the fancy way of saying, born blind versus becoming blind later in life. And I think I recognize a lot of commonalities between those experiences. It is likewise the differences between someone who's low vision, like myself, and somebody who is, what most people think of when they hear the word blind, which is, not seeing at all, even though it's a very small percentage of blind people who have no light perception. Right. And so I think one of the things that surprised me and really pleased me was hearing from folks who are congenitally blind, who are, have no light perception, and hearing that they found a lot, not just that they learned from, because I do burrow into understudied corners of blind history, but also just even in the sort of experiential stuff that there's something for every blind person in the book.
Yes, I was impressed not only by your willingness to expose yourself in writing, but also in terms of providing a lot of information about the blindness community and history and things that I think anyone sighted or low-sighted or not sighted can really gain something from. That was particularly impressive to me, because how difficult was it to write the book?
It was very difficult. I think any book is hard. I used to work for a writer who I heard him in an interview in the last year or two say that he thinks that anybody should have the experience of writing a book just as like an intellectual exercise. And, and I agree with him. I think that there's something about, for me, my experience, it was difficult, but it felt like important work for myself and for others. In other words, I was going through this experience of becoming blind, and it brought up lots of really big, difficult questions for me on the personal level, the emotional level, but also the practical level, and it made me curious about, political, social, these bigger kind of thinkier questions. And really, I can think of few activities besides writing a book that would have given me the same access to understanding the experience and really digging into it. It was tough, but it was worthwhile.
Well, you certainly put in a lot of energy in research, and also in terms of meeting people, and even coming down here to Colorado to experience the program there to get a real sense of what was available, and had some real feelings rather than some academic who says, well, this is a benefit that people might have for XYZ. You were experiencing it.
Yeah, that's something that I think I got from my background, working for magazines and, thinking, my background as a journalist, really, and a nonfiction writer and editor. And I think there is a lot to be gained from that process of reporting, and reporting can include research and calling people up on the phone, but there really, in a lot of cases, and particularly in this one, as you suggest, like there's no substitute for getting out there and trying things and meeting people and, trying to meet a wide range of people. And I talked to dozens and dozens of blind people over the course of writing and reporting the book. And that, 3 of those conversations was worth, 10 books that I read, because people's lived experience, particularly with a subject like this, is you just learn so much from it. And, I think one of the most important things I took away from that experience was the diversity of blind experience. It was my job to find commonalities and find themes that emerge, but one of the themes that emerged was that, no two blind people have the same experience, really, and that there's all these other life experiences that can intersect with one's experience of blindness that can really radically change it from person to person. And that felt really important to include. And I would have lost that if it had just been, my singular story about dealing with RP.
Well, I think, when you're talking about people being individual, but sometimes being blind, people who have blindness tend to stay away from other blind people rather than what you did was to go towards and attend an NFB meeting. And I'm assuming you visited some of the other types of schools for people who are blind, because you described, I think, so eloquently the difference between an NFB school and that type and what has been traditional in training blind people, which is to have somebody with that blind people at all times to keep them safe.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think I certainly heard that story over and over again from different blind folks who had gotten training at places like that, and also that's a place where that kind of historical research is really useful, because you can read, memoirs or oral histories of lots of blind people who have been through schools for the blind or, gotten training at centers where they do feel like everything is sort of on rails, so to speak, and it's like there's a really great book actually where I got a lot of that material from, called The Making of Blind Men by Robert Scott, which he's a sociologist. And I think it was published in the early 1960s. And he went around to dozens of blindness agencies around the country and really found what he describes, I think, as I think the word he uses is accommodationist, which is just what you're describing. Like the one detail that really stuck in my mind was like, they served the hot dogs all cut up, like pre-cut up, so that the blind people wouldn't have to fiddle with a fork and knife, where there's like a loud bell that rings intermittently on the front door of the center so that a blind person can find it, which if you're a sighted person, or if you're a blind person who has, been told that this is all that can be expected of you, that might make some sense, right? Like, well, yeah, like a loud bell does help. But, then when I visited a place like the Colorado Center and I realized like, actually, there's skills that you can use in your orientation mobility where you might be able to find the front door 10 out of 10 times. And there's no need for a loud clanging bell to mark us as a sort of like, that would be something that we need. So,
right.
But then at the same time, I guess I'll just throw out there that, I also found really compelling kind of counter arguments to the NFB style of training in some situations, particularly when it comes to folks with multiple disabilities. And that I think it's relatively easy as somebody who I've heard described as like vanilla blind, which is to say like, there's no other disabilities. It's just sort of like a mainstream blind person, to say like, oh yeah, a bell is silly, or like, having food cut up like that is silly. But there are blind people who do have multiple disabilities or other
Right.
situations where something like that might actually be really powerful and actually might be a way to access. So that sort of gets back to the diversity of blindness idea where, as soon as you say like blind people need X, I feel like it's very easy to find a counterexample in a lot of places. So I tried really hard to be mindful of all the differences within this community.
Yeah, I got a shock last Sunday at a church that I go to, and everybody knows me there. And somebody said, "Oh, do you have a home health aide come in?"
Mm.
And I said, "Huh?" Because there's an assumption. I do live alone, but there's an assumption that, oh, I have a home health aide and, all these people are supposed to take care of me. And that's the last thing I want. But there's still a piece of me that just loves when somebody takes care of me, and does
well, we all do, right?
Yeah. But
I was talking to a blind person who was telling me that, whenever she goes home to her mom, she's probably, this person who was talking to me was like in her 50s or 60s, I think. And she goes home to her mom, and her mom always butters her toast. And at first she had this sort of, blind political reaction to it. Like, what, you think I can't butter my toast? And then after a while she realized, this was my mom taking care of me, and then she had to accept it. And so I think it can be tricky to figure out like when somebody is sort of being ableist or being condescending and when they like are just trying to, show you some care.
Yeah, well, I've coined a term that I'm using in a presentation I'm giving to professionals, counseling professionals, and that "Oi PD, oh you poor dear." As soon as people get into that, I know, oh, this is going to be enabling behavior. Mm. And one of the things I got out of the center was really, no.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah. And it's the question of really being able to see blind people, as you say, as individuals. Yeah. And I'm sure that you have a wife and a baby, how old is you?
Yeah, he's not so much a baby anymore. He just turned 11.
11. Okay.
Yeah.
So, but, you've got people around who will do things for you if you ask them, but that's interdependence.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I think is sometimes very difficult. Are we giving up our independence by having somebody help us?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the very difficult, particularly if you've gone through the independence thing, to say, okay, where is the dividing line? When can I let somebody help me and not feel bad about it, in terms of my training?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a tough one. I wrote about this recently in the context of Be My Eyes and their virtual volunteer that uses AI, or just thinking about when technology is useful and when it might actually get in the way of that kind of human exchange. Then there's another way to say it is often there's value in that kind of interdependent human exchange that you lose if you put too much of an emphasis on independence. Mm-hmm. And so like my example was I went for the first time in like a couple of years to this restaurant, and the menus were behind the register, and I realized like, oh wow. And since the pandemic, basically my vision has deteriorated to where I can't see that menu anymore. And I was going to pull out my phone and maybe try to like snap a picture and zoom in or like use OCR or find their website. And then my son was standing right there. And I was just like, actually, first I asked my wife, and then my son like interjected. He's like, no, let me tell you. And the experience of him like going through all the menu items, and it was this exchange where like I was kind of giving him ideas about what he might order, and we were kind of like riffing and joking about nachos, and like that was such a pleasant experience, and one that I don't think I would have been better off if I had just like been fully independent with my my blind tech skills. And that's not to say that there's not really important uses for this. I use screen readers every day, but there also I think we need to hold space for the other side of it, which you named as interdependence, which is really important.
Yeah. Well, I think what I've said to people at times, and I got confronted by someone because I was refusing to let him help me. This was before when I was just getting used to being blind and trying to really deny it. I went into a restaurant and I kept bumping into things I couldn't find where he and some friends were sitting, and he confronted me and said, "You know how it feels when you help somebody. How dare you deny me of that feeling by not letting me help you?" And that was, and I said that to someone in the blindness community, and she sort of huffed and said, "Well, I don't do it just to make other people feel good."
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's hard.
Yeah, the balance that we have to do in terms of being independent, knowing that we can do.
Yeah.
But at the same time,
that's something that I really got from my time at the Colorado Center was, and this is something I think probably the best expression of it I've heard is when I interviewed Brian Bashin, who used to be the head of the San Francisco Lighthouse, and he did NFB style training too, and he says, like, you're not trained until you realize that basically that it's okay to get lost, and that you're not lost, like that you'll figure it out, basically, and that you can look at it like a puzzle, like a magnificent puzzle, rather than as some terrible fate that's befallen you. And the power of that is that in those moments when you do feel maybe some embarrassment or frustration, like thrashing around with your cane amid tables, trying to find your way to where you're going, like, I think, especially growing up as a sighted person, that just feels wrong, right? It's like you're like causing a disturbance. You feel like you don't belong. You're messing things up. But like, I think if you reframe things and like, what's the blind way of finding your table? It does involve that kind of, structured discovery or, exploration of a space that to the sighted eye looks confusing and maybe a little alarming. But the more comfortable you can get with just like owning the space in that way. And by the way, like, that's when other blind people really become powerful, because it's like, forget about just one blind person. Like, you got three of us like fanned out, like taking over a space. Then it really feels good, right? But easier said than done. But I've found that those moments when I can resist help and just say, like, my line that I say to friends when they're like, "I don't know how much help you need," and I tend to say, like, if I'm like about to, if there's like a huge metal pole that's swinging that I'm not going to hear, like, or a manhole that I'm about to walk into, like, let me know about that. But like, everything else I'll figure out. Yeah. And I think that's a good, like, that's kind of the level that I'm at right now. Like, cause that feels better to me. Like, if my cane hits a curb and then I just can step up on it, rather than like, as we're walking, this constant stream of like, curb ahead of you, here we go, turning right, like that just gets in the way.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's one of the things, particularly for us males, it's kind of hard to ask for help. So in some ways I'm being general, and speaking very generally, but the thing is, that's what helps us. But at the same time, to say, okay, wait a minute, you don't need to do so much for me. And that's all, sometimes that's real hard to say. I appreciate your help, but let me figure this out, because I've had little old ladies drag me across the street when I happen to be stopping to try to figure out where is the best way to go. And they pull me across the street, and I don't want to hit them over the head with a cane. So I just want to, but I hadn't intended to cross the street, but it's that kind of thing. That's the tension that sometimes is involved, and we don't want to be nasty about it.
Right.
Well, some of us, I know, but we don't, but we do have to pay attention to our abilities and feel good about what we're doing and how we're doing it. And that way we can progress.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and even if you were meaning to cross the street there, I think there's a strong argument that it's doing you a disservice if you're going to have to come back the same way, or, cross that street again tomorrow. Right. Like, her just zipping you over, in some ways it deprives you of engaging with the environment and understanding it. If you're in a hurry, And, you got to get there. Like, sure, that makes sense. But yeah, just like the default assumption that the blind person is always in need of help and that the sighted person knows what they need, it does start to add up over the years and accumulate. And I'm only really at the beginning of that accumulation because, having low vision, I feel like I can sort of like see some people coming sometimes and get out of the way. But like the less vision I have, the more intrusive I've noticed people are. And so, yeah, it is a sort of like emotional baggage question of like how much of your own psychic calories are you willing to burn every day and like fighting those battles with people versus sometimes just saying like, whatever, okay, they're never going to learn and I'm just going to move on.
I guess this is a hard question to ask, but if you look back on the book, do you have anything that you wished you put in the book or the experience or whatever? Or is the book, as far as you're concerned, is the way it needs to be?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think my philosophy of writing is that, deadlines are important, not just in a practical sense, but I think like in a kind of like a metaphysical sense too. In other words, like the book doesn't exist without the deadline. And so like, I just feel like I have to give myself up to the book that I wrote in, that I finished in 2023. And if I start tinkering with it, it's a different book. And so I'm really proud I feel like I left everything on the table and like, that's the book I wanted to write. I have heard some criticisms of it that I think are valid, but when I hear them, I don't really have the urge to want to like go back and tinker and like rewrite it. It's more like maybe in my next book, if I write another book, like, I can take some of those lessons with me. But this book is, I think of it as like a document of time too. Like I'm sure that 10 years from now, I'll have a very different experience of blindness. And I might look back at this book and say like, wow, I can't believe, how much I could see. And like, that I thought that was blindness or like, that text that I was talking about, blah, blah, blah. But like, what do I do with that information now? Like there's nothing I can do with it. So it really is like a time capsule.
Yeah. And I have no vision whatsoever. And I know exactly what you're talking about. It is very, very different than looking back, 10 years, 20 years and say, oh, I could do this then. And I can't do it now. And there is an emotional adjustment that comes in.
Yeah. I mean, that's the tricky thing that I'm curious what your perspective on it is, because so much of the experience of RP in particular for me, and especially once I've started really digging into like the world of blindness, is about kind of anticipating the next step. So like, I'm at where I'm at now. I know it's going to change. And so like, if I knew that my vision was stable and was just going to stay here, like, I don't know that I would ever bother learning Braille, but because I know that my vision is going, like I'm sort of putting in this effort, kind of like an investment in the future. Yeah. And it's hard because like, I feel sort of like a faker of just like, what's the point? But, I've already had the experience multiple times, like with the cane and with screen readers where I was sort of like, I'm doing this just to sort of be a good Boy Scout. And then what do you know, like 6 months later, I like, don't know how I would survive without it. And so I wonder was that your experience too? And how did you approach that? Like staying ahead of the 8 ball?
As soon as I left the school, I stopped really paying attention to Braille. I did some, but it's like any language, you've got to keep at it or you do lose it. And I think, I look back on it and say, well, I've got all the books here. I ought to sit down because I could really use it now. But it's hindsight, and it's one of those things where you really have to be motivated to do that. The pandemic, I think, I suspect for a number of, for everybody, sort of changed things because, again, like all the things that you're talking about, you've got to keep it up. You've got to be out there with a cane or with a dog or whatever. I use a dog, but you get out there and use the skills that you've learned and reinforce them. If you are in a situation where you're working at home, as many people were during the pandemic, and I was, once you're able to go out there, then you get into the comfort zone where, oh, well, I really don't have to do that, as opposed to, I've got to learn, I've got to, do these things. And it's kind of, sometimes I think speaking for myself, I've gotten a little lazy, and I've got to, say, okay, look, I even think about maybe I should be back at the school for a while and get back in it, because it really is so easy to get into that comfort zone.
Yeah. No, I know exactly what you're talking about. I even feel it on a micro level. Like, I'm in a dark restaurant and I have to use the bathroom, and I'm like, okay, like, the effort that it's going to take for me to, ask where it is or find it myself. And just we were describing, like, hitting people's tables, and like, maybe I'll just wait, and then I have the thought where I push back against myself, and I'm like, I have basic dignity as a person who, like, if I have to use the bathroom, I'm going to have the bravery and just not be lazy and just go. And why would I sit here being uncomfortable just because I don't want to deal with the stress of bumping into somebody's table? But, you would think that I would have I've cracked that nut by now, but it's still just I think it's this constant, things just get snowed under again, and you have to shovel yourself out again and again.
Yeah. We're human. We're going to, we're going to say, no, I don't want to do it. I haven't taught my dog to find a bathroom. Yeah. He'd be more likely to take me to a tree, because that's what he knows. But you've got it in terms of what the continual struggle, and there's part of us that's going to say, oh, I wish I didn't have to go through this struggle. And sometimes I will get into that poor me stuff. And, I hate it when I do it, and I just recognize, okay, I give myself 5 minutes to say poor me, and then I got to get back to business. But because being a total is different.
Yeah.
And I know that for a year I was without a dog, and I really was helpless because I hadn't maintained the cane skills. And I didn't have a dog during the pandemic. He had died, and it was a year before I went and got another dog. And then when I got a new dog, I had to relearn all that. I had to relearn how to get around and know the familiar landmark, because even if we had vision and we've been away from someplace for several years and we come back, we'd have to reteach ourselves streets or whatever. But as blind people, it's the same. I think, in my experience, it's been exactly the same thing. If you're not doing the braille all the time, if you're not doing the route with your dog or the cane or whatever, you tend to forget.
Yeah.
And it's like a new experience all over again.
Yeah. And it's funny, one thing that I find myself doing that I think I have to be careful about, because the experience of blindness is a unique experience, not to mention, as you point out, the experience of being a total, as you put it, versus something with low vision is also different. But I think there is a universal aspect to that, which is, if you want to be a writer, for example, you really have to write every day. And I really had to be disciplined about getting up at 5, especially during the pandemic when my kids' school kind of evaporated, and those hours between 5 and 7 were sacred to me. And every day, if you write every day for an hour or two in the morning, I don't care what you're writing, you're going to chip away at it. It might take 3 or 4 years, but if you do that every day, you'll have something to show for it, and I think people do it with exercise, right? If you're just doing 20 push-ups every day, by the end of that couple of years, you're going to be able to do 150 push-ups or whatever. And so I think blindness skills in a way are no different. And if you're just forcing yourself to get out there, it's going to be painful at first, the same way that the first time you go back to the gym after a couple of years is painful, but it is possible to chip away at these things.
Right. And I think that when you were asking about Braille and saying, it's good if you can keep it up, But, if you decide now I need to go back to Braille, and there's a real tendency for all of us to say, oh, I should have stayed with it the whole time. And what was I thinking? And, all that second guessing. Well, you say, okay, this is something you have to relearn. I learned it once. I should be able to learn it again. Mm-hmm. And I will be more diligent in keeping it up and give ourselves some breaks.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it has to do, we may, and I'm just speaking for myself, I'm not speaking for anyone else, but, we have our expectation. We're supposed to be perfect, the perfect blind person or the perfect, and when we don't, then we can slide unless we remind ourselves, wait a minute, be kind to ourselves and say, okay, I let this go. I have to go back to it and kind of encourage ourselves and say, I'm blind, but look at all the other things I can do that don't involve blindness. And look at you, you're still a writer. Yeah. And you'll always be a writer. And that's where we have to keep reminding ourselves, yes, we may have less of one thing, but that's true as we get older. We don't move as fast as we did when we were 16. But I think there's something
really important in what you're saying too, in that you started out talking about the "oh, you poor dear," perspective that other people can take towards you, but now I think hearing you talk about being kind to yourself, and the way that one can oh you poor dear yourself, and I think it's in some ways that's even more important than sort of struggling with how other people treat you is how you treat yourself in these situations.
Right. And how you compare yourself. And how you compare yourself to other people, particularly when you start comparing yourself to someone who's blind, or just allow yourself to enjoy something like a painting differently, or the theater. I'm a real theater buff. I use audio description, and that enables me to enjoy it in a different way. It's not the same, but
no, that's such a powerful idea. I think if anything, that would be the most important lesson I learned from writing this book and just thinking about this stuff is that exactly what you just said, that it's not necessarily like people only really see blindness or disability as a diminishment, as lessening, as something that's categorically worse. But if you can reframe it as a difference, where it's like, sure, like I need to find the restroom in this restaurant differently. It's like we don't have to think of it as a worse way. It's just like I got my blind style, or I enjoy theater with audio description. It's a different way to do it. And actually, like audio description brings up really interesting questions about description and language and interpretation that you're not thinking about if you're just staring at the actors on the stage, right? And so, it is silly to argue that like blindness is, always puppy dog tails and sunshine, and like it's not extremely difficult or inconvenient at best in many situations. But that also doesn't mean that like it's only doom and it's only worse, and that I feel really strongly that so much of the stuff that I discovered in this world from writing this book and just hanging out with blind people is genuinely world expanding rather than diminishing.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that a friend of mine who was at the school loved to cook, and one of the things she was afraid of, I won't be able to cook. Well, she learned how little she used her eyesight in cooking. It was more taste and feel and so forth, and that's what we have to just remind ourselves of that. We're different. We use different skills. Now, I don't want to be drive an 18-wheeler. So, I can't mourn the fact that I can't drive an 18-wheeler. But there's so many other things that we have, and also our appreciation of things that other people would take for granted.
Absolutely. Yeah. Sighted people are using their senses of touch and hearing all the time, but I do think they're unconscious of it. And being blind does sort of force you to appreciate those worlds. And there's a lot going on in those worlds.
On the other hand, I'm amused at myself sometimes when, somebody is treating me as if I'm not blind. And I say, don't they know I'm blind? Well, people are so used to me being able to, do my thing, and they don't have to. And I say, wait a minute, Lundgren, that's exactly what you want people to do, not focus on blindness, but focus on the things that I can do. And if they let me, do my thing, and I don't have to worry about them taking over, that's the ideal situation.
Yeah.
But it's
right.
But it's hard to getting used to this different world, even though we've been in it. I've been in it for a long time. It is a different world, and that's why I'm doing a presentation. I said to counselors, and I'm going to say the term I'm using it, behavioral health care for those who are differently able. And try to get people out of this mindset of disabled or whatever. I think I've been indoctrinated enough to like that way, and I think that you also are looking at it from that way, and that's definitely an important shift.
Absolutely, yeah.
How, if you don't mind being personal, how is your wife adjusting to all of this she seemed to be a lovely person in the book?
Oh, definitely lovely person in real life as well. It was tough to include some of the stories about her that I did, because I didn't want to just gloss over some of the more difficult times that we've had around
that
it.
Really struck me.
And I think she was very generous in letting me include those moments, because I think it's important for people to understand. And it was something that I hadn't really seen represented in stories about blindness that much, was the way that one's partner or one's family has to adjust alongside you. And I think there is this very solipsistic feeling that can come from blindness, where it's like you said, like, poor me. Like, this is only happening to me. Nobody else understands. Like, they don't know what I'm going through. And my realization, I think, in writing about my relationship with Lily in particular, is that, she didn't understand it in part because I wasn't talking about it or telling her about it or really including her in it. And so it was easy to get frustrated with her for having these sort of so-called, incorrect responses to, the first time I used a cane in front of her, or when I would do a bad job of cleaning up the kitchen when I didn't really realize my vision had changed, and I would miss huge, swaths of dirt on the counter, on the floor. But it felt important to talk about that in the book, in part because it was so difficult to talk about it in our marriage. And, that's an ongoing process. Like, it's not like I wrote the book and we had the conversation and we're done, but at least we have a sort of better sense for the importance of those conversations. And so now, as my vision continues to change, it's a bit easier to say, like, hey, you know what? Like, this isn't working quite as well as it used to. Let's put our heads together and figure out a way to do it so that our lives together can function again.
Well, I think that you're remarkable as a writer in paying attention to all of that, and we're all fortunate that your wife was willing to let you write what you needed to write, because I think it's, as you say, the whole family has to be involved.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Unless you're single. That. Yeah. But people have to, the family member more than anything else has to understand, and also their temptation is to try to protect us.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing that is actually doing the opposite. And so if the caretakers who are listening to us and, could read particularly that section, those sections in the book where you talk about your wife's experience, they benefit a lot from that.
Yeah, I hope so. And I think it gets back to the idea of interdependence too. Like, I think there's a strong value in my figuring out how to continue to clean the kitchen. Like, I can't just say, oh, I'm blind, so like I guess you have to clean the kitchen now. But at the same time, not going overboard and understanding the ways in which it's okay for me to get help from Lily, or for her to take over some things that don't make sense for me to do. And that there's no easy answer there, and it really requires a sort of day-to-day mindfulness of what makes sense, or what people's needs are, and also realizing that she's got needs too, and like just back to the sort of solipsism thing. I think it's easy to be like, well, I'm the disabled one, and so my needs are massive, and that they're the main point of conversation. But like, that's not how marriage works, right? Like both partners are equal in this. So that's been an interesting journey too.
Yeah, well, I think one of the other things too is that we can be very the spouse or the partner who is blind can also be lulled into kind of using that as a weapon. I've seen this when I've done couples counseling. It's like, again, OAPD, and it's kind of encouraging. And what I felt as I was reading was the two of you were having a healthy interaction. That is, she was expressing some doubts and so forth and trying to get used to your situation, trying to understand it. And you were trying to negotiate for yourself and help her negotiate it as well. And that was that was a good, because you don't, as you say, you don't often see that sometimes in real life, but also in terms of, book. Saying, okay, here's what both people have to do, and what the children have to do, and what will benefit everybody. Yeah,
that's such an interesting idea that I think connects back to what you were saying about your friends. Your feeling of like, well, why don't they remember I'm blind? Not that you're using blindness as a weapon there, but it's something I recognize in myself too, where I've gotten so much attention from this book, and like as a writer, using blindness as a subject, and it's intoxicating, and it can sort of lull me, I think, into this feeling of like, this is the most interesting thing about me, or like, this is required now for me to, to get people interested in a story. And I think there is something kind of toxic about that. I think in the positive sense, it's like, these are, I'm really proud to bring blindness into, a national conversation or a broader awareness. But on the other hand, I think there is a risk of using it as a weapon in that way. And I don't want to hear myself turning into somebody who just sort of is like parroting like political talking points about ableism without really capturing the nuance and thinking about it. And, and recognizing the places where blindness doesn't matter, and where there might be some other issue that is the more salient point. But if I'm so fixated on using it as a weapon, I think that possibility falls away, and it's like the only thing that's worth talking about in any given social situation.
Well, we can always dream of the day where physical difference doesn't make any difference. Which I know is a pipe dream, but to be able to, where, okay, I'm blind, I know how to deal with that. You just be who you are, and then and being blind is only part of who I am. And it's not a major part. It just adds a little character. Adds a little character to my being.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I write in the book about the blind bioethicist and professor Adrienne Ash, and she used to make the point that, she didn't ever really feel blind until she experienced discrimination because of her blindness. And that's when she really felt blind. But otherwise she was just, Adrienne, the classical music lover, Adrienne, the scholar, the activist, the friend, and blindness was this sort of incidental characteristic that didn't really make a big difference until, she tried to get a job and they said, I don't know how we could get a blind person to do this. And that's when she felt blind.
Well, Andrew, this has been a wonderful conversation for me. I certainly appreciate your being on Blindsight.
Oh, for me as well. This has been such a pleasure.
And I hope that, that we may even get you back on at another time, because I think you're very articulate, and you're a very good, you're a wonderful writer.
Thank you so
in
much.
my opinion. And I thank you for having written the book.
Oh, well, I'm really grateful to have such a generous and careful reader as you, and a great conversation. I learned a lot from hearing your perspective as well.
Oh, great. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Blindsight. Your host, Bill Lundgren, our guest, Andrew Leland. Again, I would really suggest that people go out and obtain a copy of the book, In the Country of the Blind, A Journey into Blindness. It is available, talking book with and Bard, so that's how I managed to read it. Andrew, again, thank you. And for those of you who may have some comments or questions or whatever, the website as of January 1st will be feedback at blindsight.org. Everything will be aftersight, rather. I'm sorry. Feedback aftersight.org. I'm still getting used to it. It changes January 1. But anyway, for any feedback, certainly this has been Blindsight. Thank you.